think everybody knows the American president by now. And this is a person that we were supposed to make a deal with and we're going to make additional concessions for. That's why I say you can't make a good deal with a bad person.
After getting a preview of what was on the table for a Canada-U.S. trade deal this week, Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew had a frank assessment of this week's negotiations. I'm Leisha Grabinski, sitting in for Catherine Cullen, and today on The House, is Canada risking long-term pain in pursuit of short-term tariff relief? And what are the political stakes for the Prime Minister, who campaigned on dealing with U.S. President Donald Trump? We've got two former cabinet ministers, a Conservative who's part of a key Canada-U.S. committee, and a Liberal who served as Carney's chief of staff to weigh in on the political consequences that could be ahead. And our summer series continues from Saskatoon, where farmers are just starting to get on their combines to harvest their lentils, wheat, and canola. They're eager to grow more, but what's getting in their way? We look at what it would actually take for Canada to feed the world. But first, is Canada caving to Donald Trump? The House in Saskatoon is now in session. Before we dive into the politics, these have been high-stakes negotiations between Canada and the U.S. Let's take stock of what we know and what it could mean for Canadian jobs and the economy. CBC senior business correspondent Peter Armstrong is here to walk us through. Peter, we're connecting late Friday. Thanks for making the time.
Glad to be here.
So looking broadly at what we know, does it look like Canada's economy could be getting real relief here?
I mean, broadly speaking, yes, right? Like if you go from 50% tariffs to 25% tariffs and 25% tariffs to 15% tariffs, like it is progress to be sure. The concern, of course, is what does this mean going forward and how is this going to play out with all of these different, not just sectors, but businesses within each sector will have to absorb these tariffs and these changes very differently, right? And the thing I keep hearing from so many of the businesses I speak to every day is a lot of this depends on you're taking the outcome of this potential deal. And we've all sort of heard the broad rumors and numbers and details that are swirling around there. And the businesses I talk to are very telling me to take a beat. Let's wait and see what the fine print says, because it's often different from what the politicians say. But if you take the potential outcomes that we're looking around that, the question everybody has is, well, what do you compare it to? Do you compare it to pre-Trump, like 2019? Do you compare it to the end of Trump 1 or the beginning of Trump 2? Or do you compare it to like Liberation Day? Or, and I think this is the one I think people keep coming back to the most, is do we compare this to Tuesday night when Canada was facing the very real possibility of either 50% tariffs across a sweeping series of products going to the United States, the likelihood that talks would just collapse completely and everybody'd walk away from the table, counter tariffs and reciprocal moves from the United States, and a deepening cycle of retribution in an already really intense trade war. If we're comparing it against most of those, this is an improvement. But if you compare it to pre-Trump 1, this is pretty lousy. And even if you compare it to the end of the CUSMA talks, we're talking about entrenching tariffs. So yes, there's a benefit here, but at what cost, I think, is what the businesses I speak to every day keep asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, until now, the U.S. has essentially been forcing tariffs on Canada, and Canada now seems ready to ink a deal with, as you're saying, some level of U.S. tariffs. But what could agreeing to that mean for Canada's future with the U.S.?
So the bigger thing here is this the deal, or is this kind of a way station, an interim deal, after which we get back on track to renegotiating or renewing CUSMA and addressing the broader concerns about the free trade deal between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, in which you could bring down some of these rates even further. And I think the concern is, when you look at it more broadly and more really zoom out, if Canada's agreeing to the legitimacy of some tariffs now, is it embedding and baking in the likelihood or the absolute necessity of tariffs in the broader agreement, right? Like that's the concern, that if we're saying, yes, okay, we'll deal with these here and now, do they become an immediate and permanent part of the landscape of, I guess we'll still call it free trade, but of North American trade going forward. And that has been something of a red line going back through the last several rounds of negotiations, that we would, these tariffs that were imposed ran against CUSMA, ran against the USMCA, ran against NAFTA, and the sort of the core of what free trade of the last 60 years was and is meant to be. And if we're agreeing to them now, have we given that horse up and said, okay, going forward there will be tariffs and that's just part of the landscape? That's a tough pill to swallow.
To be continued. Peter, thank you so much for this.
Oh, you bet. Glad to do it.
CBC senior business correspondent Peter Armstrong. So let's get into the political stakes of all of this. After being elected on a promise of elbows up, where do these negotiations leave Prime Minister Mark Carney? And what does he do about provinces who aren't happy about what they've heard? Let's get some former politicians to weigh in. Marco Mendicino was a Liberal cabinet minister and chief of staff to Prime Minister Mark Carney, now senior counsel at Castle's law firm. Lisa Raitt was a Conservative cabinet minister and currently a member of the Advisory Committee on Canada-U.S. Economic Relations. I spoke to them Friday evening. Marco, Lisa, welcome back to the House.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Good to meet you.
Lisa, I want to start with some comments from Vice President J.D. Vance earlier this week. He weighed in on negotiations while speaking at a fundraiser and said, quote, "It's hilarious because Carney presents this as some victory for Canada when fundamentally, they climb down on a lot of issues." Do those comments make Canada and the Prime Minister look weak?
Not at all. No. I mean, you can obviously tell that J.D. Vance is speaking to a room of people he's trying to get fundraising from, quite frankly, and it's a friendly room. And he wants to be seen to be pumping up the president. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's drawing a contrast between the president and our prime minister. I don't think it's founded in any kind of fact. And as a result, I observe it as something interesting, but definitely nothing that is important enough to cause concern in Canada.
Marco, how do you see it?
I think in Canada, we've become accustomed to that kind of saber rattling, which I think says more about the noise that's coming from the United States than it does about us good Canadians here. I think the reality is that there are many Canadians and Americans who believe in fair and free trade, but that world has changed. And I have to say, at this very late hour, as you pointed out off the top, this negotiation feels like Game 7, like a replay of last year's World Series between the Jays and the Dodgers, except with the obvious distinction that there are real-life consequences for workers, businesses in our two countries. And I do know this, our team is fighting hard. The Prime Minister has spent his professional life managing through economic crunches like this. This is another one. And he's built a strong negotiating team with Janice Charette and Dominic LeBlanc, who have been at the table around the clock, and they're fighting very hard too, even at this late hour. This is about as difficult a negotiation as you can imagine. You've got Trump and his shifting positions, his love of tariffs, his disdain of CUSMA, and most of all, the adversarial comments towards Canada, like the one you just cited off the top. You've got, in principle, the demise of free trade. We had a deal. That deal has now been eroded by this new world in which we're living in, and there's no wishing it back, and we can't impose our will on the United States. So what's the next best alternative? And I know that is exactly what our team is trying to negotiate at this very late hour.
Lisa, if Canada accepts some level of tariffs from the U.S. now, could that damage the future of free trade?
No, I don't think so. I think that this is a particular set of circumstances in a particular time with a particular presidency that we need to have clarity on what we want to accomplish. And what we want to accomplish is maintaining market access to the United States. And any kind of deal that we strike to continue to have that market access is very important. Who's to say what happens in 4 years from now or 8 years from now? We'll continue to have discussions, and perhaps one day we'll go back to the free and fair trade that we've experienced since 1989. But for now, this is the hand we're dealt.
Marco, this is a bit of a test for Mark Carney. This deal will be one of his biggest tests as Prime Minister, especially after positioning himself as the best person to negotiate with Donald Trump. We know that there's a lot of concessions on the table here. Can Carney sell this to Canadians?
Well, first, let's just caveat that we don't yet know what the final reported deal could look like, or whether or not there will be a deal at all. I think, reasonable-minded Canadians will say we ought to be able to find some terms that would, if we can't eliminate tariffs, at least lower them. I'm mindful of the pain and duress to auto workers. My wife's from Windsor, Ontario. I mean, that's a community that has been hit particularly hard, as have many other communities in Ontario. I'm mindful of softwood lumberers and our coastal communities, particularly in BC. I'm mindful of aluminum workers in Quebec. So there's got to be some relief there. And if it can't be zero, what's the next best thing? I think that's what we're trying to do. But in terms of the strategy, I also think we have to be sort of realistic about what this new negotiating environment looks like. And I think CUSMA, which we're now sort of going to see how it plays out, and the review of that particular agreement, can't be forgotten in all of this. So whatever we negotiate, if anything at all, as has to be seen as more of a bridge or a step towards something that could be more durable in the long run.
One Canadian who does not sound happy at all is Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew, who even took a shot at Carney. Here's what he said on Wednesday.
I was told by the Prime Minister that he wants us to put the booze back on the shelves.
Without giving you details?
They gave us some details, and other stuff they said they're still nailing down. So I wouldn't say that he was begging us, but what is a step before begging?
Lisa, Carney is going to need provinces to buy in here on some of these key concessions, like getting U.S. alcohol back on shelves. But when you hear comments like that, how challenging do you think that will be?
Well, I think he laid the groundwork already. He met with all of the premiers in a First Minister's call that happened early on after it was announced that we were going to have this extension for 72 hours. I'm sure if he didn't feel like he had the confidence of the premiers to continue negotiating, we would have heard it by now. I've said before, I think it's unfortunate that Premier Kinew decided to go in the direction that he did, but I would point out that no other premier did that. Every other premier is saying, well, we're Team Canada and we're going to plow ahead. I do think it's important, though, for the Prime Minister to be a lot more transparent and a lot more candid as he rolls out what this deal looks like, should we get a deal. And I understand fully why and how it was determined that there was going to be less than full disclosure as to what was on the table in the negotiations, because that's what you have to do. You need to negotiate. You can't really tip your hand and show the cards. However, Canadians, I don't know. I'm going to tell you, I think Canadians, up until this week, were expecting to either get no tariffs at all, or we were going to be fighting with the United States for the next 2 years because we wanted zero tariffs on everything. And now it's coming at us with, okay, we're going to accept some tariffs, and we're going to maybe accept some quotas, and we're going to continue on from here. I don't think it's necessarily a bad deal to do these things, because I do think that the Section 338 tariffs that the United States is threatening to put on us are quite damaging, and we do need to do something about it. I just don't know whether or not Canadians are ready for it. And I actually, the evidence for me is the amount of people commenting on what I said in terms of, this deal may not be a bad deal after all. There's so much anxiety and anger around taking any deal at all. They want to roll the dice.
Can I just jump in? Because I want to build on what Lisa said, and I agree in large part. I think the reality is that there is, over time, been developed a real distrust. Some of that is because of the adversarial comments that have come out of the administration. But let's not also underestimate the very real economic impact of the tariffs on Canadian workers and, frankly, on American workers as well. And as a result, it has put, as I said at the outset, real stress on everyone. And I think that is a big part of the reason why Canadians are not in a deal-making mood, speaking candidly. And I think the other complexity here, and Lisa put her finger on it, is that there has been minimal information shared in the public domain. Now, that's for good reason. The negotiators are in a real bind. The more you share, the more there could be either leaks through stakeholders who need to be briefed, or even worse, shifting sands or grounds when the positions shift from your counterparts on the other side of the table, and that has happened. I do think that if there is a deal, that it is going to take more engagement, more transparency, more working closely with stakeholders and industry leaders, and to bring them along, because no one individual can, bring an entire country along when it comes to steel. The Prime Minister has the biggest and most compelling bully pulpit, but that also needs to be amplified by the folks who are most impacted by whatever agreement we're going to negotiate.
We're nearly out of time, but I just want to get some quick answers from both of you on this last question, because we know Trump's showing to strike deals and then demand more later. So, Lisa, do you think that a finalized deal survives?
Of course, because we've seen it before. I mean, he's had a deal with the UK for a period of time already. He's got 10% on autos, and he's got 25% on steel. And yes, Trump will find something in particular that he's not happy with, and he'll apply a tariff to that. For example, in Germany, there's a claim against pharmaceuticals. That's going to pop up along the way. But I fully anticipate that once we settle these matters, if we settle these matters on these specific sectoral tariffs, that they are going to stick. And then we roll over into some kind of discussion on CUSMA.
Marco, a brief thought from you.
Well, briefly, I do think that there are some concerns about the long-term viability of any agreement. We have seen in the past the Trump administration agree and then slap back additional tariffs. I think, to be, again, forthright with Canadians, there need to be snapback provisions and obvious consequences in the event that there is any breaking with whatever agreement we could be negotiating. And I think that will be one of the ways that we can instill some confidence that even though this is not in any way an optimal set of conditions, that we are eyes wide open about how we have to build into this some mechanisms to ensure that there is as much incentive to respect the terms of the agreement going forward. And last thing I'll just say is thank you to Lisa Raitt, my friend and former colleague, because I know she's serving on the Canada-U.S. Advisory Council, and she's doing a great job at it. So thank you, Lisa, for the work you're doing on that front.
Marco, you're very kind, but you're sucking up at the end of the interview instead of the beginning.
You got to get it in somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, thanks to both of you for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Former Conservative Cabinet Minister Lisa Raitt and former Liberal Cabinet Minister Marco Mendicino. We spoke late Friday. Lots more coming up on the House podcast as our summer series on food security continues. We're asking, in the land of big farms, does Canada have what it takes to feed the world? I'm Leisha Grabinski, host of Blue Sky in Saskatoon, sitting in this week for Catherine Cullen. You're listening to The House from CBC Radio. Here on the prairies, we're known as the breadbasket of Canada. But could Canada become the world's breadbasket? This country exports about $100 billion in agriculture and food products. And a good chunk of that comes from massive farms right here in Saskatchewan. Do we have what we need to export even more? To get an idea of the challenges, we drove 2.5 hours west of Saskatoon to Colville to meet Dean Roberts.
I'd say I've been farming since 2003, but you start as a kid on a farm, so really, I can truthfully say I've been farming my whole life.
We're surrounded by gold and rust-colored fields that stretch as far as the eye can see, on land that Dean's grandfather also farmed.
So right now we're standing in the middle of our farmyard. We're a 10,000-acre family farm, joint venture, multiple families, generations involved in the farm. We have parcels here and there, so we hopscotch our equipment across the land where we need to get to.
But unlike in his grandparents' day, the tools he uses to farm now are incredibly high-tech. Parked right next to us is a huge pesticide sprayer. That's the sprayer behind us here.
This is the sprayer behind us, yes.
Much larger, much taller than you.
Yes. So it's got clearance underneath to go over top of the crop while we're applying our crop protection products like a herbicide or a fungicide.
But you're investigating newer technologies.
Yes, well, that's the spirit of innovation in agriculture. You're always looking for a better way.
And what might be a better way?
I don't know if it's a better way, but it's a different way, and that's a spray drone.
Can you show me?
Absolutely.
Okay, this is quite the setup. Hi.
So that's the DJI T100. It's currently the largest available drone in Canada. It has a 100-liter capacity tank.
Cody Selke and Sadie Nygaard are with farm equipment dealer Pattison Agriculture. They've set up a demonstration of the latest in spray drone technology. This isn't one of those little ones that hover and hum over top of you to capture a photo. This drone is big. The blades are longer than the span of my arms, and it has enough power to lift a large jug of liquid fertilizer off the ground. Sadie holds a gray console in her hands like she's ready to play Minecraft.
It is very similar to a video game. As you're going, it kind of feels like you're in a flight simulator, so that's fun.
It's a much larger drone than what I've seen the average person use to get some shots. It's quite a bit bigger.
Yeah, definitely. It's a little overwhelming when you first see it.
Well, it speaks to the scale of Western Canadian agriculture. We're big fields, we're big operations out here compared to other parts of the world. Now, this is a large drone, and yet I would need several of these to replace that sprayer. So it's an important step, but still scale matters in the prairies.
And other countries have had access to this.
Yeah, for a little bit longer, yes.
Dean was already using drones to find rocks in his fields, which can get stuck in combines and cause tens of thousands of dollars in damage. But in June, Health Canada approved the use of drones to spray pesticides. Dean's thinking it might be useful when fields are wet and his traditional sprayer can't easily get across the fields. When the sales rep Cody describes this new tech, I feel a bit like I could be at a military briefing.
On the top here we have the quad eye lenses. This dome right here on the front is the LiDAR sensor. It pumps out 350,000 light pulses per second. That's your main obstacle avoidance tool.
But there's still limitations.
That's the battery pack she's putting in there right now.
So it looks like a small suitcase.
Yeah, it's about 40 pounds, approximately 10 to 12 minutes of flight time loaded. It's the main pain point of the drone right now is the battery technology.
Today, Sadie and Cody are only spraying water to demonstrate what the drone can do.
It'll start counting down.
As part of this pitch to get Dean to buy this tech, there's a TV set up in front of us with a map showing which section of the field the drone will spray.
So it'll because it saw the power pole on its last pass, it's going to remember that power pole's there.
So it's smart.
It's relatively smart.
What do you think?
I don't know. It looks interesting. The productivity is quite a bit higher than I was expecting, actually.
So after all your years of farming, what do you think of the fact that this is a technology that could potentially be of use to you?
Well, it's just the continued evolution. When I was my daughter's age, 14 years old, we had no GPS. We had a two-way radio. Maybe the two-way radio wouldn't reach. Well, now you have a cell phone. Well, then we added GPS guidance to add more precision to our field operations. So this has just been the next generation, the next iteration of technology adoption that's been going on prairie farms for generations.
So has all that made farms more profitable?
I would say it's upped our productivity. It's certainly allowed us to grow more grain on the amount of land we have available to us. I would hope it's improved our profitability. There's days I wonder when I get a repair bill for some of this new technology, it's all quite expensive.
It's like a spaceship landing.
You know, I'm not used to seeing equipment move without somebody in it. This would be the first piece of autonomous equipment on our farm, so there's a bit of an adjustment there to watch it happen, frankly.
So the use of the drone technology just got approved. But you noted that other countries have been using this technology for a while. China, Japan, Brazil. What does it say to you that Canadian farmers are only getting access to this technology now?
Well, to me, that's telling me that we're not leading the industry anymore. We're lagging adoption. At one time, I would have said Canadian agriculture was at the forefront of technology. But this drone example, you know, maybe makes me question that. Maybe we're not quite as out in front as we thought we once were. Drones existed, we could physically buy them, but we didn't have a regulatory environment to actually use them. So in this case, I would say it was regulatory holdup was our delay here.
What else gets in the way of you being the most productive farmer you want to be?
I think to increase our production is one thing, but we have to get it to market. The vast, vast majority of our crop is going to go to export. And for my farm where I sit, there is only one viable way to get it to Tidewater, and that is the railways. The average Western Canadian crop has 1,500 kilometers of rail line to Tidewater.
What kind of bottlenecks have you already seen on that rail line?
In my career, we've seen all kinds of delays where there's bad weather at the coast or bad weather through the mountains and they're not able to ship. So a backup at port pushes back to the railways, pushes back to the elevator. But unfortunately, that cost is borne by me on my farm because I can't deliver the grain, I can't get paid, I can't pay my fuel bill, I can't pay my fertilizer bill. I perhaps get charged interest if I'm late or not as on time delivering that grain as I would like. It's all economic fallout for the farmer, let alone the stress and mental health issues of being delayed and held up.
So what is the best way to move them in a more efficient way? Would an additional rail line? Do we need improvements at the port?
There's a number of issues there, and certainly infrastructure is needed and welcomed, but we're going to have to address the labor issue as well. It doesn't matter what you have. I look at this fancy John Deere combine behind me. If I've got nobody to put in the seat or nobody shows up for work that day, it doesn't do me any good. So infrastructure is going to help, but predictability around some of the labor is going to be a challenge as well.
Why are you short a driver this year?
Well, lots of oil and gas activity in this area. It's a very tight labor pool. We run ads to try and find skilled labor, but this equipment's got more complex. You can't just find anybody off the street to run it anymore. You have to have a certain tech background. You have to have a certain mechanical inclination to fix it, work on it. You have to want to get dirty. Harvest is very dusty. We're 2.5 hours from Saskatoon, which is by no means a large center. Some people consider Saskatoon a small center. For me, it's the big city. So you have to be comfortable with the rural life. You start talking about a very unique individual that wants to move here and make a career here.
On the infrastructure part, if we were to unbundle it and hone in on focus on one thing, just to give people a sense of what's holding things up, what example would you give?
I think that'd be really tough at this point. I have a great lens as a farmer. I can talk about what it takes to get the grain to the elevator and the experience at the elevator. Once it leaves my hands, I don't have as good of a window. We're hearing increasingly that we're an unreliable trade partner because we don't always get the grain to the coast when it needs to be there to load a ship. Those ships perhaps are charging demurrage. Again, that pushes back to the farm gate and harms my profitability. So this is a very real problem for me. Unfortunately, it's not one I can solve. We looked at the fungicide issue. We looked at harvest losses. These are all things as a farmer I can control. Actions at the coast, that's all on Ottawa's plate at this point.
As we walk past the seemingly endless fields of lentils and the millions of dollars in equipment used to harvest them, I asked Dean how farming in 2026 compares to how his grandfather worked.
It is big business. The dollars have got much bigger, the risks have got bigger, the impacts have got bigger. It's certainly not what my grandpa started, it's not what Dad lived, and even since when I started farming, it's certainly changed in scope, impact, complexity.
Is it possible for you as a farmer in Saskatchewan and other farmers in this province to feed the world? Can Canada feed the world?
Absolutely. Canada can feed a large part of the world. We have lots of arable land. We can grow a great crop. We have a great climate for doing it. So absolutely, we can feed a lot of the world. I don't know about the entire world with one province, but we can take a shot at it.
So do you feel more like a farmer or a CEO at this point?
There's days I feel like both and days I feel like neither. Depending on the day, because as a farmer you're a generalist. So one day you're doing tax and financial planning, the next day you're diagnosing an equipment repair, the next day I'm learning about insect biology, trying to understand what's eating my crop. I don't know what the role would be anymore, and each farm is different. How we run our farms is different based on the skill sets around the table in the morning. So on any given day I could be anything.
Dean, thanks for having us out here on such a beautiful summer day.
Well, thank you for coming out to the farm today and seeing a bit of what we're doing out here in Western Canadian agriculture.
After talking to Dean Roberts on his farm in Colville, I headed back to Saskatoon to meet Evan Shout, the CFO of one of the largest farms in Saskatchewan and the owner of Maverick Ag, a financial consulting firm. Growing up, he didn't think he'd make such a high-flying career out of farming.
I grew up central Saskatchewan, small farm, and got told there was no money in agriculture, go to school. So thank you, Dad, for the CPA and accounting degree I have now. But it always came back to the fact that agriculture was growing, and as it got bigger, we needed to start treating them more like a multi-million-dollar business.
He now uses his accounting skills and that family farm background to coach other farmers on how to be CEOs. So Evan sees and hears a lot of the frustrations his clients across North America experience, like what might be holding them back from sending more of their crops around the world. I sat down with Evan in his boardroom. Here's part of our conversation. When you sit across the table from different farmers, what are the major concerns that they talk to you about?
Yeah, I think there's a few. It's hard to find labor nowadays. So as you grow, labor becomes a real issue. How do we get people to move into not only rural communities, out of the cities when everybody else is moving into the cities, but then how do you understand the growing season, right? We're not working 9 to 5 all year. We're working very busy in seeding, harvest, spraying. Over the summer months when guys want to be at the lake, farmers usually aren't. And then all of a sudden we get into winter and it's a little slower. So how do you get somebody that's used to that seasonality?
Dean Roberts, he talked about the stress of the movement of his crops so he can grow, but then what happens when he drops it off at the grain bin and off it goes to the country that is buying it? How often do you hear farmers talk about the movement of their crops, and are they concerned about the infrastructure that's there?
I think it's probably top of mind, to be fair. How do we become not only a reliable trading partner for the world, but again, if we go back to the farm gate level, how do we know that we've got a contract that's going to move? We're tight on cash flow. We need that cash, and all of a sudden the trains aren't moving. Or we've got crossings that are blocked, or we have strikes, or we have a port that can't load in the rain. Like, those infrastructure issues that are real issues come to the forefront when you're the last person to get paid. And I think that's where farmers get their discomfort from, is that it's one of those uncontrollable risks. We don't control the trade partners that our government works with. We don't control the investment into infrastructure.
So what do farmers need in terms of infrastructure?
I think the big one, and whether they like this or not, they need a voice. And part of it is internal structure, and part of it is just a seat at the table. Yes, we've got a voice, but it's at the secondary table. So it's no different at Christmas time. You have a kid's table and an adult's table. Well, agriculture has never been sitting at the table with the finance ministers or sitting at the big table. And I think part of it is the size and scale of agriculture just don't put us there, and the importance. And I mean, not to pit East versus West, but it's clear. The other side of it is, I think there's enough natural resources, let's call it, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's nutrients, whether it's minerals. Why are we just agriculture? Why are we not a ministry built around natural resources? Because that's what agriculture is, essentially. I still think at the federal level, agriculture is not talked about enough, and it's because it's not top of mind.
What do you think could shift that?
Good question. I think part of it is we need to be seen as what we're actually providing to Canada in general. Part of it is the split between Western and Eastern. It's there. And don't get me wrong, we work with farms in Eastern Canada, but I just believe that the discussion comes back to an East versus West split, and West has agriculture and East has production, automobiles, all that side. And I think part of that is where the split comes, is that we just don't have a big enough voice when it comes to Ottawa.
What's at stake if you're not at the big table?
If you want to use the word that I think probably gets the most attention, food security. If we get to a point where margins are not possible in agriculture, either the government has to step in and subsidize, which nobody wants. They don't want to hand out, they want to hand up. I think the biggest part is that part of our industry through the pandemic, we did not see the same dip as other industries because food security was top of mind. Once that was over, we fell back down, and now all of a sudden we've forgot about the fact that you can use the old rhetoric that you need a doctor once a month or you need a teacher once a day. You need a farmer 3 times a day. So it just falls back to the fact that if we don't produce strong food, we don't essentially have the ability to send it to other countries.
If agriculture was a greater focus of the federal government, would we have the ability to feed the world?
I believe so. I believe that right now we grow some of the, not only the cleanest and environmentally sustainable food in the world, but we grow certain crops such as wheat and canola in an abundance. And right now, what we found is that the ability to lose some of our export markets has actually forced us internally to make our own changes. So you're seeing more canola crush, you're seeing more canola plants go up in Western Canada, because we found that if we're not going to get help to take it elsewhere, we need to do the processing at home. And that's a great thing. The investment within Canada, we are all on board for that. But it took the fact that we were losing markets to actually bring that into Canada. I think we need to see more of that. I think more value add and just more ability for farmers to make a living without needing the handouts.
This has been very interesting, Evan. Thank you so much.
You betcha.
Evan Shout of Maverick Ag. So to talk more about food security and whether Canada should try to feed the whole world, Evan Fraser is Executive Director of the Arrell Food Institute at the University of Guelph, and Jennifer Clapp is Canada Research Chair in Global Food Security and Sustainability at the University of Waterloo. Jennifer and Evan, welcome to the house.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First off, Jennifer, I'm in Saskatchewan. I'm in a place where food is growing all around me. Is Canada managing to feed people both at home and around the globe?
Well, that's a great question, because although Canada produces more calories than we actually consume as a population, we're not exactly the Shangri-La of food security in Canada. Recent studies and data from StatsCan show that in 2025, around 1 in 5 Canadians experienced food insecurity. That's a really high level. Around 6% of Canadians are experiencing severe food insecurity, and that means they're skipping meals and going hungry. So this level of hunger is unacceptably high in Canada, and it means we're failing on social programs and other policies to ensure everyone can fulfill their right to food.
Evan, the fact that we are the breadbasket of the world, and as Jennifer points out, people in this country are going hungry as we watch food prices go up. You've written about something that you call the food dividend. Can you give us an overview of what you mean by the food dividend?
So I think the current system that we've got today really is based on 3 assumptions. And the first assumption is that the weather is pretty stable and productive. The second assumption is that energy prices are low and stable. And the third assumption is that it's relatively easy to trade food across borders. And when those 3 assumptions were met and have been met for the last 20 or 30 years, it's been easy to produce a lot of food fairly cheaply. But we're coming to the end of that cheap food era. And I think of this as sort of a food dividend. Just like the decades of political stability allowed governments to underfund or reduce the priority of defense spending, we're coming to a point where we're realizing that we've underfunded or we haven't prioritized agri-food research, agri-food investments, agri-food interest in general. We're waking up to a very different century with a very, very different set of assumptions.
So, Evan, why do you believe Canada should produce and export more food if we are still finding it a challenge to distribute that food and feed people here at home first?
Well, there's a couple of things going on here. I mean, and none of this, there's no ors or buts in this statement. These are a bunch of ands. I mean, we need, to Jennifer's point, much better social policies to help protect low-income Canadians from food insecurity. We absolutely need that, and we're falling behind on that card, frankly. The Canada feeds the world argument, I think, is a little more nuanced than that. The modeling work that I've done suggests that whether or not we like it or not, climate change will make Canada more productive at the same time as climate change is making parts of the world around the equator less productive. So regardless of any policy or prescription or decision we make, Canada is going to grow in importance in terms of the global food system. That means I think the world will inevitably come to rely more on Canada. And the decision that I think we make as a country is how are we going to realize that future? Are we going to do that in a way that's equitable and just and promotes nutrition and sustainability? Or are we not going to do that? And that's the decision which I think we face as we come out of this cheap food era.
Jennifer, though, what are the risks involved when other countries start to rely on us more and more for their food?
Yeah, that's a great question because, while Evan said maybe Canada will be able to increase some of its production in an age of climate change, there are definitely risks. I would say the risks are partly ecological risk, but also partly economic risks, especially for other countries. So, while it might seem tempting to say, let's just ramp up our exports and feed the world if other parts of the world are experiencing lower production than they would like to have. But it's not always so simple. So Canada exports a lot of wheat. We export high-quality durum wheat. It's actually more expensive wheat than, say, for example, many sub-Saharan African countries buy. So they're often buying grain from, Russia and Ukraine, which is lower quality wheat. It's cheaper. And so it's not like we can necessarily fill those markets with our expensive wheat, which is used for, other kinds of products like pasta, for example. Another example is lentils. We're a major producer and exporter, but there's actually other big lentil-consuming countries like India that want to be more self-sufficient. They want to support their own small-scale farmers, and they've put tariffs on peas and lentils, and that's really affected Canadian producers and exporters. So there are, those kinds of risks that if we go into that strategy, we might not find the markets. But also there's risks for other countries, because if we're dumping our products on poor countries, that could undercut the ability of their small-scale producers to have a livelihood. So we have to really be nuanced and careful about how we pursue our diversification of export strategies. And then the other risk is if we see an expansion of area that can grow due to climate change, we're going to see more deforestation. In Canada, there could be huge costs because most of our production is industrial production, use of nitrogen-based fertilizers, fossil fuels, machinery, cloud data, which requires data centers, monocultures, land clearing. All of these kinds of physical factors put a real strain on our environment because they lead to higher greenhouse gas emissions, declining biodiversity, water pollution, and et cetera. So there's just, there are risks. We can't just sort of wave a magic wand and export more and feed the world. It has to be carefully thought through.
Evan, what's your take on what Jennifer just said?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is an area specifically of sort of empirical research that I do. So we're doing modeling where we're trying to combine soil maps and crop maps and climate projections and whatnot. And I think the really scary example that Jennifer's hinting at, and the picture Jennifer's painting is of the Amazon. And back in the 70s and 80s, nobody really thought the Amazon could be deforested for soybean fields and cattle production. And yet that happened because the market forces and environmental factors allowed for it to happen. And I'm desperately worried that as climate change does indeed cause a reproportioning of productive assets across the world that makes Canada more productive relative to some areas, that as we wake up and move into that century, we do it in a way that doesn't result in the boreal forest becoming another Amazon forest clearance. And one nightmarish scenario that Jennifer didn't mention in her list was all the Indigenous issues which are present if we imagine widespread agricultural expansion across Canada's north, which was also a part, of course, of the Amazon story.
It is complicated. And so I'm wondering, Evan, do you think Canada should hold off on some of its export goals?
No, I think to the contrary. I think we should be preparing ourselves as a country for the future where we become a more important breadbasket. I think we have to prepare for that. I think the way we do that, perhaps to quote Mr. Carney's Davos speech, is through some combination of principled pragmatism where we establish very clear guidance and incentives around sustainability and engagement with Indigenous communities, ecological conservation, and we do this in a mindful way. I think saying no isn't appropriate because it's going to happen given the nature of the changes we're facing. I think it's a question of how we engage and do we engage in that responsible way.
Jennifer, can it be done mindfully?
I think we need to try to do it mindfully, but we also need to be mindful of reliance on volatile markets, especially in this geopolitical moment in the world. We're seeing huge volatility in markets. We're seeing world events, closure of Strait of Hormuz, Russian invasion of Ukraine, this kind of thing, that lead to uncertainty in global agri-food markets. And so, at the same time that Canada is pursuing a national food security strategy saying we want to rely more on our own production at home and be less reliant on imports, I think we shouldn't necessarily be encouraging other countries to also become reliant on imports if we're trying to not do that. So it's a little bit contradictory. And so I think we need to be careful because we could put more resources into, for example, more sustainable agriculture at home, more resources into infrastructure and processing, et cetera, at home, rather than simply trying to grow as much as possible and export it simply because of those, ecological and social risks that Evan and I both mentioned.
Yeah. So, Evan, is this country even in the position to increase its output? Our exports are increasing, yet Canada has dropped behind other countries when it comes to the global food trade. An RBC analysis last year said Canada slipped from 5th to 7th place globally because of growth from China and Brazil. And so I'm wondering why that's the case.
So essentially, the total sort of size of the pie of global food trade has grown faster than Canada has grown. And that means that although we are producing more, we are producing less in terms of the overall percentage. And that gap is largely filled in by, as you said, Brazil and China. And I believe that same RBC report suggests that we will fall further based on current trends. To a large extent, that seems to be adoption of technology, especially in the prairies, relatively slow uptake by farmers. Not all farmers, of course, but slow uptake of farmers of specific genetic technologies, specific agri-inputs, mechanization, and things like that, relative to places such as China or Brazil. And I think we could probably address that issue relatively straightforwardly. I think the National Food Security Strategy is an important step in that process.
Is it farmers that are moving slowly, or is it government policy that has gotten in the way of this?
Well, if you talk to farmers, it's definitely government policy that's slowing things down. And we do, as a country, have a reputation for having a very slow-to-move policy and regulatory framework. But at the other side of the coin, and not to sort of talk out of the other side of my mouth, that same regulatory framework means that Canadian food is amongst the highest quality, most trusted, and safest in the world. We don't have the sort of food-borne ailment problems that other jurisdictions have.
I wanted to just pick up on something that Evan said there as well, that, or at least about the Canada slipping in the global tables on biggest food exporters, just to say that those data typically change all the time. And a lot of it depends on weather and other kinds of factors. It's not simply technology. I would say that might be part of it, but I don't think that's the whole story. And probably
good point.
We will climb back up, I'm sure, in future. I mean, the year where there was a major drought in Canada, we really dropped in those tables, but we came back.
Yeah, good point.
So then, Jennifer, what is the most important move you'd like to see from the federal government next?
Well, I think, as Evan said, the National Food Security Strategy recently announced is a good start, but I think there's more that we can do. I think one of the more important things we need to do is to support more sustainable forms of agriculture, and that means increased funding for agroecological farming that doesn't require fossil fuel-dependent inputs like machinery, pesticides, fertilizers. You know, if we can refashion Canada as a sustainable agricultural powerhouse, we can be a better trade partner at the international level. And internationally, I think rather than simply trying to export our products to especially the poorest food import-dependent countries, we need to help those countries to improve their own production capacity through sustainable agriculture. I think it needs to be Canada's new brand, sustainable food.
Evan?
We need financial measures that reward farmers for farming more ecologically. This could be carbon credits or biodiversity credits or water credits. But as long as we're in a system that only rewards farmers for producing a commodity, we will only get farmland used to produce that commodity. And so we need a financial flow, some sort of carbon market, for example, to reward farmers for farming more ecologically.
Well, lots to think about there. Jennifer, Evan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
University of Guelph's Evan Fraser and Jennifer Clapp from the University of Waterloo. We reached out to the Agriculture Minister's office and put to them some of the infrastructure and trade concerns raised today. In a statement, Heath MacDonald's office pointed to the investments made in infrastructure through a $5 billion Trade Diversifications Corridors Fund. It also mentioned the proposed Vancouver Gateway strategy that would support bulk terminals. That's it for us this week. Our crew on the house is Emma Godmere, Benjamin Lopez-Stephen, Derek Vanderwyk, and our senior producer is Jennifer Chevalier. Technical production by Miguel Plante. I'm Leisha Grabinski in Saskatoon. Thanks for listening.